Welcome back to the Friday Club. Really pleased to see so many of you here again this week. This week I'm really lucky because I'm joined by Diana Morant, Head of School and University Consultancy at William Clarence Education. Diana, thank you for joining us today.
Not at all. Thanks for having me, Sophie.
Really excited to be talking today because I know you've got so much insight, having worked on two sides of the coin. Before I get into that, William Clarence Education is one of the leading education advisory and consultancy services in the UK. And I know that part of your role is supporting families from all over the world with their applications to UK and sometimes US educational institutions. Before I go into your past experience as a Director of Marketing and Admissions, Diana, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your current role at William Clarence, please?
Yeah, sure. I've been with William Clarence for just over 3 years, overseeing, as you said, all the school and university consultancy side. My background is in schools, which we'll talk about, I think in a minute. So we work with families from all over the world and some UK families as well. We advise from everything from nursery up to PhD applications, so the whole range. And some mature students as well. What we tend to do is I meet all the families in advance, learn about them, their situation, what they're looking for, children, their sort of educational aims for their families, where they want to live, the sorts of schools or universities they're interested in. And we normally for schools, we assess children unless they're tiny, and then take it from there. For us and for me, it's incredibly important with schools that we're finding the right school for the child. It's not just the famous name school, it's got to be the right school. So that's really important for us. We obviously as well work very closely with a whole range of schools, day and boarding. The schools consultants and myself spend as much time as we can seeing schools and keeping ourselves up to date so that we're aware of, changes at schools and how things, are moving there.
Amazing. So you've really seen both sides of the equation, really, haven't you? Because you work with families now, but I know that in a past role, you were Director of Marketing and Admissions in a school. Mm-hmm. So you must have seen how the admissions process, how a school's marketing efforts have really changed over the last few years, particularly with things like the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a massive change. I, as you said, was in marketing and admissions for 12 years. And even in that time, things changed considerably from this sort of old-fashioned glossy prospectus, paper prospectus, to much more sophisticated websites. I think on the whole, schools have done a fantastic job. I think over the pandemic, they realized that they needed to really upgrade what they were offering on their websites. So for a lot of our families who are overseas, being able to have a good virtual tour or access to information online is absolutely key. And quite a number of schools I've spoken to in the last sort of 6 months have said what it's made them realize is that this shouldn't just be for their pandemic, this should be for good, because their overseas families are very important to them and they need to be able to see and gain as much information as they can about a school virtually. Everybody can't just drop everything and come to the UK to look at schools. So there's been a massive, improvement, I would say, all round.
Absolutely. And do you think there's anything that schools can do around the language that they use that would make it perhaps more accessible for international families?
I think schools have to be careful about using jargon. I notice sometimes, occasionally, schools are still using words that are very specific. So boarding schools sometimes use the word exeat instead of weekend out, just little things like that. I think they have to be careful not to get too carried away with jargon that, means something to a few people, but to a lot of international families, it doesn't. So I would say, just make it as easy to understand as possible.
Makes sense. So with your insight, I know that lots of people listening to this who are currently in a schools marketing or a schools admissions department will be really interested as to your view of what families are looking for in a UK school.
I think it will depend on the family, but first and foremost, most international families that come to us are coming because of the standard of the education. They really value the standard of a UK education. So our families who are looking for boarding schools, you know, they may be sending their children halfway across the world to board, maybe at 13, maybe at 16. And the reason they're doing that is because they believe the education their children will get is world class. Similarly, you know, for our day schools, I'm working with a number of families at the moment who have relocated to this country purely for the education. A lot of them will do it in tandem with a work move, but they're, you know, that is the driving force is often the standard of the education. There are other things. I think our boarding families really value the extracurricular offer, the amount of activities and things that there are available. Day families similarly, compared to quite a lot of countries where school stops at 3, you know, in a good day school, there's so many more things that the children can become involved in as well. So I think that extracurricular offer, the way the schools are structured, a lot of our families like the idea of the quite traditional uniform. They like, you know, good discipline, accent on good behavior, manners, that sort of thing as well.
Wow, yeah, and it's really good. It's like a huge testimony, isn't it, to British education, that people are willing to pick their life up and move over here just for the education.
Yeah,
I know that there's lots of resources that a family might look at, like websites, literature. How important do you think league tables are in that decision making?
I should probably be quite tactful. I personally am not a huge fan of league tables because they don't tend to be that representative. Not all schools enter their exam results. You know, things like IGCSEs are not always counted. A school that does a pre-U rather than A-level. So I always say to families, I would just take the league tables with a pinch of salt. Clearly, a lot of people I speak to are, you know, they'll look at league tables and they've heard of the famous name schools. But for me, it's more about what we really know about that school and whether it really is right for a particular child, rather than the fact that, you know, on a particular league table, a school might come out top. You know, I think we all know, or we know, which are the seriously academic schools. So I, you know, league tables for me are not important.
Absolutely, and I really like that humanistic approach of knowing what's right for the family, knowing what the school will offer that will, you know, really nurture that particular child.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to be ambitious, and we always try to be as ambitious for our families as possible if that's what they want, but we also have to be realistic. Otherwise we're not, you know, that is not good advice if we're not being realistic as well. Yeah,
I mean, we want our children to be successful, but we want them to be happy too, I guess. So absolutely. So you've mentioned working with both day schools and boarding schools, and I've tended to find that the marketing is different for a boarding experience versus a day school experience. But do you ever find that a family would look at both options for their child?
Yeah, no, we do. We have a lot of families living, for example, in London, who will sort of, if you like, run both at the same time. So they'll enter their children for some London day, but they will also consider weekly boarding, so maybe within an hour of London. And I think that's fine, as long as they do obviously need to make that decision beforehand, which route to go down. But I think a lot of families, you know, when their children are 8, 9, understandably, they're not sure they want their child to board at 13. But, you know, as a child gets older, they may feel that for that child and for them, a weekly boarding option is a really good fit. So definitely, I would, we, depending on obviously the family, but I would be happy to say to a family, let's explore both routes at the same time.
Absolutely. And I guess what's on offer as part of the boarding experience and in those extracurricular activities is a big pull for a lot of families. I can really imagine that. And I see so many things on social media that schools are doing, and I think, gosh, I would have really enjoyed that as a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old.
And actually, if you're a busy working parents or parent, and you have maybe 2 or 3 children, and if you're trying to get them to different after school activities in London, it takes a huge amount of effort and coordination. A child in boarding school, has lessons, goes straight out to sport, comes back in, maybe has a lesson, then there's debate club or drama or whatever it is, endless activities, orchestra, then they do the homework. You're not having to do any of that. It's all done and overseen. There's no time in the car. Some parents also feel that it's a slightly safer option than having their teenagers traveling around London. So, obviously it depends on families, but weekly boarding is really popular now.
Yeah, I can see why. And I imagine that schools want to include lots of information about what they do outside of the classroom as part of their marketing. Do you think that schools ever miss off anything that's really important for a decision?
I think sometimes some of the London schools, and when we're often asked, particularly a lot of our families are moving to central London, where clearly there is not a lot of outside space, for example, but quite a lot of our families say, oh, but we do want to have a playground, or where will they play sport and things like that. And I think sometimes maybe some schools don't show that side enough. So things like that. So quite small things. Sometimes some of the schools outside London, for example, you might have a boys' school and a girls' school. Do they really show the tie-up between the two? Because some parents might want a single-sex school, but they would be interested to know about the tie-ups between the schools. So I think sometimes there are things that schools maybe, they're quite small things, but they can be important to parents, particularly if you're sitting in Australia or New York and you have, no idea, understandably, of what you're looking at.
Absolutely. And I think I've seen a few examples of where a school will offer a single sex education, but because of the location, they can have joint activities, joint extracurricular.
Exactly.
And I imagine, if you're sending your children to a different country to board, that's probably really nice that, the siblings will be together. So
sure. I think it's important. And for some parents, it's almost a reason for why they choose a school, because if they want single sex, they've got a son and a daughter, the dates are going to be the same and things, but the schools should, maybe just celebrate a little bit more the importance of those tie-ups, I think.
Amazing. So in your work then with families and consulting with them and finding the right school for them, you no doubt have to work with a lot of schools as well. Do you have any advice for schools listening about how they work with agents, recruitment partners, external consultants?
I think for the schools, it's probably quite hard. For me, the key is that there is a real difference, certainly in my mind, between agents and consultants. So William Clarence, we are a small consultancy. We have very good relationships with schools. We visit as many schools as we can to keep ourselves up to date and current. And I would say, certainly when I worked at admissions, I wasn't prepared to work with an agent who really didn't seem to know anything much about my school, but was happy to maybe send me 30 children, irrelevant of whether they were right for my school or not. And I think that's, and I'm sure schools, I'm sure I don't need to tell them that, but I think that is something that's really key. So, I would just say to anybody, make sure that person does know your school and understands your school, because if they don't, what are they doing trying to send children to you? And they, as I know, a lot of admission staff have said to me, they've been burned in the past by an agent sending them maybe 2 or 3 kids and then moving them on after a year because they just wanted to take a commission from that school and then move them on. So I think, to build up good relationships, you really need to make sure that they know and understand your school.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. One of the topics that's quite widely spoken about at the moment as we're entering into a new open day, open morning season, is what schools can be doing after that initial visit or tour or contact to, keep those relationships warm.
It's a good point. Some schools I think are very good at it. I think others could do a lot more. So it sounds obvious, but always follow up. I've just been doing a whole lot of open days and visits for clients. There's been very, very little follow up from schools afterwards. Just, I would say, follow up, keep in touch. Of course, not everybody wants to be bombarded with information, but at least give them the option to say yes to receiving more communications. And just, I think it's just keeping in touch. It always surprises me how many schools never even follow up when you've just sent a family there to visit or for an open day. And everybody's busy, but I would think that that's pretty key.
Yeah, definitely. And finally then, Diana, as we head towards the end of our time this morning, we like to ask all of our guests what their favourite thing is about working with independent schools.
Ooh.
It's hard, isn't it?
I think for me, it's the huge range of schools and the different sort of characteristics of each. I work with some fantastic schools in the middle of London who, in very limited space, offer an amazing education. And then we work with small, beautiful, sort of rural boarding schools or day schools, large, small. They're just great. I love it. I love being able to go in and see schools. So recently I've been able to do school visits again after all the COVID things. And it's great. It's great to be in those schools. I think it's just the range, the variety. I love seeing all the kids in class or going about doing what they're doing. And I think it's, what is on offer is incredible. So, as much as schools can showcase that, the better, because that's what captures people, I think, is, that incredible range of opportunities.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I found this really insightful. I've taken a lot away from it personally. I know that lots of people who subscribe to the Friday Club will as well. So really huge thank you from us at the Friday Club team. And we hope to talk to you again in the future.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.